Okay, so let's talk about ethics for a minute. But I want you to forget about all the abstract rules and heavy philosophical debates, just for now. We're going to look at ethics as something, well, physical. Something that actually lives in your body and shows up in the things you do every single day.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get into the problem with our usual, super fast way of looking at ethics. Then, we'll dive into this idea of ethics as something that happens in physical space. And finally, we'll check out a quieter way forward and what that all means for how we interact with things like AI.
All right, let's start with the feeling we all know, this pressure to have an instant opinion, a quick judgment on everything. But what if that constant rush to be right is actually causing more problems than it solves?
You know, we tend to think of ethics as this big mental workout, figuring out what's right, what's wrong. But here's the shift. What if ethics is already happening, right now, in the way you're sitting, and how you move, and how you engage with the world around you? The whole idea is that ethics isn't just something you think, it's something you do.
And this slide, this is where it really clicks. You've got these two different ways of interacting. On one side, you have moral judgment. It's fast, it's decisive, and it's obsessed with being correct. But in our world, especially with AI speeding everything up, that approach can totally fracture the connections we're trying to make. But on the other side, you have this slower approach. It's not about being right. It's about sustaining relationships. It's about tuning and adjusting to just keep the connection going.
So that leads us right into this really powerful new way of thinking. We're moving away from these rigid abstract rules, and we're moving towards something way more practical, embodied techniques that, anyone can actually use.
And it all comes down to this big reframing of a single word, interference. Now, normally we hear that word and think it's a bad thing, right? An interruption. But here, it's a skill. It's the art of stepping in, not to judge or to break something, but just to tune it, to adjust it. The question completely changes from what's the right thing to do to how can we keep this relationship going? And this is exactly what we mean when we say physical. These aren't some grand moral declarations. It's the small stuff, the concrete choices you make all day long. Where do you put your gaze when someone's talking to you? When do you decide to speak up, or maybe more importantly, when do you stay silent? When do you step in, or when do you just wait a beat? Sometimes the most ethical thing you can do is just choose not to touch, to maintain that bit of respectful distance.
This brings us to this idea of contemplation. But again, it's not what you think. This isn't about sitting in a quiet room having deep thoughts. This is contemplation in action. It's physical. It literally shows up in your posture, in the distance you keep, and maybe most powerfully, in how you use silence. And it totally flips our idea of action on its head. Because in this way of thinking, choosing not to act can be the most powerful, the most skillful, ethical move you have.
So, okay, how does any of this apply to the world we're actually living in right now? Let's take these ideas, tuning, distance, contemplation, and apply them to one of the most complicated relationships we're all trying to figure out, our relationship with AI.
You can see the exact same principle at play with technology. We can treat AI like a judge, just firing off strong commands, demanding the fastest, most correct answer possible. Or we could treat it as an environment, a space for us to think. In that mode, we'd use gentler questions. We'd allow for a slower kind of confirmation. We'd engage with it less like a tool we need to command and more like an atmosphere to think within.
So, why does all this matter? Well, because you can apply this approach everywhere, at work, in tough conversations, with new technology. It basically turns ethics into a kind of behavioral design. And, this is really cool, it lowers what's called the cost of world updating, which is just a way of saying it makes change and progress less jarring, less painful, and way more sustainable for everyone involved. And so, we'll just leave you with this question. It's one that puts this entire idea right back where it belongs, in your hands, in your body, where ethics actually happens. What ethical choice can you make today by choosing not to act?